Hi everybody, it's great to be here again to talk about how to have a good day in uncertain times. Today we're going to talk about decision making and particularly dealing with dilemmas. And obviously we all as human beings are making tons of decisions every day. We're making, I would say, thousands, tens of thousands of decisions every day, because if you think about it, we are making decisions at every given moment about what to do, what to think, what to say. We're not just making sort of the obvious decisions like what to wear or what we might choose to eat. And so every single second of every day, our brain is computing choices and making decisions about what we might do. And most of that's on autopilot, thank goodness, because, of course, it's quite taxing for our brain to make choices. And so, it's a wonderful thing that we have this system where most of our decisions are made by our automatic system, our automatic part of the brain on autopilot. But obviously, there are decisions that do require some conscious thought. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. And in particular, I'd like to talk about one particular type of decision, because if you think about all of the advice on how to make a decision, it usually starts with getting your thoughts in order and getting structured in how you're thinking about what the pros and cons are of each option. If you're very excitable about putting structure around decision making, you might even do what my husband and I have done a few times, which is to decide what all the factors of success are, give them weights, and then rate each option against those factors, and then toss up the scores, and then see what that tells us. And we've made decisions like that, for sometimes quite small things, sometimes quite big things, where we're choosing perhaps between two different apartments that we'd love to live in the same part of the city, and we're trying to make a decision on which to rent. Or it might be that you're trying to make a choice between two trains to catch or two rather similar jackets to buy. And when we have similar-ish choices to make like that, a decision-making can feel taxing, but it's manageable. It's ultimately manageable. The bigger issue for us is when we have a dilemma that actually doesn't present itself in such a nice, comparable way, where we have a situation where the options that are in front of us really aren't so easily comparable. They tend to be from the Greek dilemma, meaning two propositions based on two different propositions about how you would see the world. And that might be much more like, okay, well, which city do we live in? That might be sort of quite substantially different views of where you think things are going to go. And so we face dilemmas, big and small, a lot of the time in our lives. The sorts of dilemmas that tend to cause us stress, though, and probably the reason that you've decided to join today, is because the sorts of dilemmas that cause us stress are those that have some consequence. They have some weight to them. They matter. We feel that getting them wrong would feel bad. They're complex. There's a lot of different factors at play, and those factors aren't pointing in the same direction at all because of those different propositions about what would make it a good decision to go this way or that way. And it can often feel as if these are decisions that feel chaotic as well, because you're dealing with uncertainty about how things are going to play out. And that is a recipe for quite a stressful type of decision, where actually, if anything, it doesn't feel so much like a train track dividing nicely and the points changing and you going this way or that way, but more like a kind of handful of spaghetti where it's very, very hard to pull apart the knot and figure out, well, what's the right way to move forward from here. And so that is one of the most challenging things we face as human beings, is to make good choices when we're in that kind of situation. And one of the reasons that it's so hard is that our brain actually doesn't have a tremendous amount of working memory to deal with. And some of you may know what working memory is. It's the mental scratch pad that is the conscious part of our brain that we're using to hold information in our minds right now. And for many years, people used to think, based on some early research, that human beings could hold in mind right now, mental scratch pad, 7 things, plus or minus 2 maybe. 7 things. But then actually what it turns out in more recent research is that actually it's much more likely that what we can hold in mind as human beings is 3 or 4 things at once. 3 or 4 things at once. And as soon as you start to approach that limit, we start to effectively have our working memory like a computer feeling full and awkwardly so, to the point where we feel like we can't really get our arms around the topic anymore. And we know from what we covered last week and the week before that there's something peculiar that happens to us when we feel stretched and overloaded. If we start to feel that our sense of competence, our sense of control and autonomy is being challenged in any way, it's quite likely that our brain will perceive that as something of a threat and tip us into defensive mode. That's the fight, flight, freeze response to anything that might be a possible threat in the environment, however small it is, however existential it is. And as we've learned, when we're in defensive mode, what happens is that there's less activity in the brain's prefrontal cortex. And that means we're not able to access the full range of our intelligence in the same way as when we are feeling more relaxed and less stressed. And so what happens in this state of fight, flight, or freeze, or this defensive mode state, is not just actually a mental narrowing, it's also a visual narrowing. It's a tendency towards more tunnel vision, which is something you can measure in the laboratory, and the metaphorical version of that, which is tunnel vision in our thinking, not being as expansive, as broad in thinking about what the different options could be. We're also knee-jerk, so we stay on the surface. We don't perhaps go as deep as we might in thinking things through. And that's the tricky thing, really, because dilemmas require our best thinking and our fullest presence, and yet they're the most likely decisions that we have to make to tip us into defensive mode and therefore make it harder still for us to be at our best. So I'm going to share a few things that I've learned over the years, some of them research-based, some of them experience-based, that have helped many people, including under research conditions, to make better choices. And I'm going to start actually by saying, first of all, there's an acceptance point to make, which is that the whole reason that some of these things are framed as dilemmas is because there's no right answer. So let me give you an example from my own life. In February 2019, I was living in New York, having chosen an apartment with my husband. We were based in New York, and my mother's health took a turn for the worse. And we were very clear on the right thing to do. We dashed back to London to be around and to be there to help and support. And we were very lucky because we actually managed to find someone who was able to sublet our apartment in New York for actually quite a long time. They had construction works going on in their home, and so they needed a place actually for a good long chunk of time. So this was perfect for us. And we were able to have them be in our furnished apartment, and they were very, very happy with the arrangement, and as were we. It was wonderful. It allowed us to be in the city that we wanted and needed to be in. But then what happened was that our lease was coming up for renewal in October 2020. And so we were in summer of 2020, remember last year, I know it feels like 5 years ago, last year, we were thinking, okay, well, what do we do now? Do we extend our lease and then carry on trying to sublet? And actually that was a quite quick answer because we knew we'd got very, very lucky with our subletters, and they were actually moving back to their home. And so we knew we probably weren't going to get as lucky again. And it's very hard to arrange subletting from overseas. So we thought, okay, well, that's actually quite clear. Okay, so we're going to give up the lease, but then we've got a 2-bedroom apartment full of stuff. So what are we going to do? What are we going to do? Are we going to, I don't know. And that's when the dilemma starts to fill your mind. Your working memory gets full very, very quickly. You know, we've got beds and sofa and any number of things. We've got a life there because our place in London, we were subletting while we were in New York. So there we are. That was the dilemma. And the first thing was to actually say to each other and to repeat it to ourselves that there was no actual easy right answer here, because we didn't know how long we were going to be away from New York. We did think we were going to go back. We didn't know really what to do, but we did know that we were going to try and take a calm and structured approach to thinking it through. And we were going to be kind to ourselves in accepting that there was probably not going to be a perfect solution to whatever we wanted to do. So what did we do? First thing we did was to stop the swirl of all of the stuff that was running around our heads in our working memory, making it very hard to feel calm and centered, and got that landed and articulated in a way that, well, was quite simple really, but actually just the fact of articulating what we knew for sure, what our goals were and what our options were, was an enormously powerful first step in creating a sense of calm. So that was very helpful, and we did get to a clear sense of, you know, what those known goals and options were. We'd already decided that one thing we knew was we were going to be around for family. Both of us care a lot about reliability. We decided that we weren't going to sublet. Okay, so those are the things that are known. And you might remember from the second episode in this series that one of the most powerful things you can do when facing into uncertainty is to articulate your certainties. So that's a great first place to start. What were our goals? Well, and we had to do that together. So financially manageable. Emotionally manageable, actually, because the stuff that we had, you know, we cared about. The things that were in our apartment in New York were not borrowed, you know, they were purchased. They were owned by us and used by us. And then we needed to make sure that it was logistically possible to actually manage what we wanted to do. And you know, some of that was actually also about, frankly, just not revisiting the decision again and again and again. And then what were the obvious options for us on the table? Well, there was an option to ship everything to the UK. There was an option to sell everything, or as much as we could, give away the rest. There was an option to try and store it. And that was helpful, just to articulate, this is the world that we're working in. So it's ship, sell, store. Okay. And then I started to build a spreadsheet, which is, you know, how I think about dealing with lots of complex things. I build a spreadsheet and I start to think about how do we start to kind of fill out what these options look like. And there are two things that you can do to start to get over that tunnel vision that we experience when we're feeling a little stressed about a decision. We know that when we're feeling tunnel visioned, we're not necessarily thinking with a level of sophistication and depth that we do when we're actually at our best. We've got blind spots, and the question is, well, how can we fill in those blind spots? And I'm going to talk about two of my favorite questions for filling in blind spots when you're dealing with complex dilemma like this. The first one is this question: what would you have to believe for this option to be a good option? Now, why does that help? It helps because it surfaces your assumptions. It gets underneath the hood. It gets you away from knee-jerk leanings towards one option or another, and it allows you to really test, well, what is the world, what is the proposition, going back to the Greek, that this world is describing? And that was then what we did in some depth. We went through each of the three options. We went through ship, sell, and store. And we started to fill out what that looked like. And it started to become very clear that as soon as we looked into that, that shipping was not a good option, because it would mean an assumption we weren't going back to the US anytime soon. I'm looking at my notes from the actual experience that we had of making the decision, that we could use those belongings in the UK. No, because we didn't have anywhere to put them. Or that it would be cheaper to store them in the UK than in the US. No, not true. That shipping potentially both ways wouldn't be more expensive than storage in the US. No, also not true. So that was actually quite quick and easy, and underpinning the decision with the understanding of the assumptions was very, very helpful. Okay, now sell. What would you have to believe for that to be a good option? Well, first of all, you'd have to believe that it was actually easy to sell stuff, which actually was quite easy to test, because in summer 2020, it was very, very hard to sell things in New York, because we weren't able to. There were lots of people who left the city, a lot of people who were making choices like we were about, well, where do we place ourselves during the pandemic? So that was actually quite quick to test. You'd have to believe, to sell everything, that it would feel okay to get rid of our belongings, and that it would be relatively simple to set up home again. And that the cost of a storage unit in New York wouldn't be higher than buying all of our stuff again. Okay, so that's all testable, actually. You find out the cost of a storage unit, and you try selling a few things, and it turned out to be very difficult to sell things. But then we were still looking at, well, okay, well, what about the sort of cost of a storage unit versus buying our stuff again? Maybe we could kind of come up with a hybrid solution where we don't store the big stuff, that we sell that, and that we just store the small stuff. So then we started to look at what were the assumptions under storing. And that really was a lot about that emotional issue of, like, how good was it going to feel to get rid of our stuff versus to go back to New York and then feel that we were home again. And actually that was quite a powerful point. And then we were also trying to figure out, well, again, what would the cost of a New York storage unit be compared with the cost of buying all of our stuff again? And then this was testable, because then we were able to gather all the data on, well, how much was the replacement cost of all the things in our apartment, and how big were they, and therefore how long would it take, how much space would it take in a storage unit. Now this started to drop out a bit of an answer, but I was still wondering whether there were any things that we might be missing, whether there were any blind spots that we might have. Because this question is brilliant at getting you deep, to stop you being superficial and knee-jerk about the discussion that you're having with yourself or with whoever you're making the decision with. But there's another type of blind spot, which is that you've just missed some assumptions, that actually you haven't looked more broadly at the field of vision that you would have if you were not feeling stressed. And this is where the second question comes into play, because it can be strangely powerful to say, what could I do? What else could I do? And there's something specific that I want to pull out there. It's not what should I do, because that is a phrasing that tends to increase a sense of stress and intensity when you're trying to make good choices. But there's something very specific about the phrasing of what could I do? And there's research on this by Ting Zhang and team, who looked at people's ability to see third options or hybrid options to challenging dilemmas. And this question, what could I do, was found to systematically be more effective in helping people see hidden options that would otherwise have been hard to see. And why is that? Probably because it takes people a little bit off the defensive, because it gives you back a sense of control and possibility. And that is treated by the brain as something rewarding, and that helps to get us out of defensive mode. So when we thought about, okay, well, what could we do? What else could we do, given that we had some options on the table? And as a result of asking that question, a couple of things came to mind. I'll just pick out one of the things that really mattered most to us, which was, it turned out that actually we were thinking about storage units in New York. But since we were going to have to put everything in a van anyway, why not look a bit further afield where it might cost less? And that was it. The dominoes started to fall, because it turned out that if we were willing to drive a bit further, then the cost of storing was actually so much less than the cost of replacing all of this stuff, even if we decided we didn't like our couch anymore. And so that combination of two questions was what enabled us to get to a place of feeling good about our decisions. And that is indeed our actual storage unit in New Jersey, which is at that point about a quarter full. So that was the decision. Now, there is something also to say which echoes a bit what I said right at the beginning, which is the nature of dilemmas is that there is no right answer. There's uncertainty, there's complexity, there's a tremendous sense of weight in making the decision. So one thing you can do, you can't be sure of the outcome. You can't be sure that what you chose was in fact the optimal decision based on the outcome that you want. But you can feel proud of the process. You can say, okay, in 2 years' time, when I look back on how I approached this, what will make me feel good about the way I went into this? And for us, a lot of it was about feeling, okay, well, we hadn't made the decision from a place of being in defensive mode. We had actually managed to be as systematic and as informed as we could be to make sure we weren't making purely emotional decisions, or indeed actually purely financial decisions or purely logistical decisions, that we were really thinking about the whole thing together. We also thought about what our values were, and I mentioned earlier on that we both had a value of reliability, and the fact that that was very clear that we wanted to be around for family. And so that helped a tremendous amount, because it helped us feel like, well, whatever we do, we're doing the right thing. And then there was also, occasions where we needed to remind ourselves that we were doing the best we could. We were doing the best we could, which gets back to, of course, last week's conversation about self-compassion and why that's helpful in its own right to reduce the state of alert and allow you to think clearly. I'm going to pause for a second, and I'm going to check in and see what we've got coming in on the comments. Be curious to know what kind of dilemmas have you had to deal with over the last year? We've had so many challenging risk assessments to do in thinking about how we live our lives and how we balance the need for professional effectiveness and education of our kids and mental and physical well-being. What dilemmas have you wrestled with over the last year or longer? And what is it that you found really helps you? I'll give you a moment to have a think about that. It's wonderful to see some familiar names here. That's fantastic. Oh, yes, and someone has noticed Bom dia. Yes, that's right. I try to rotate the different editions of How to Have a Good Day so that you get to see how to have a good day in a few different languages. And I'm going to also share one other little nugget with you, which you might find funny. Let me just get to the screen where it is. So, when you think back about people who have helped you over your life, there were probably some mentors or bosses or peers, indeed, wise peers who have given you great advice at different times in your life. And one earlier dilemma that was going on for me in the mid-90s, was whether or not I should carry on with my graduate studies to do a PhD, having got 1 year into the first step towards that. And I was starting to feel really uncertain about whether I wanted to actually work in academic economics, which was my discipline, was economics. And I had a boss called Mervyn King, who was chief economist of the Bank of England at that time. It's the central bank in the UK. And I remember making a little bit of time to talk to him about this dilemma. And I laid out all of my my woes, my challenges in making the decision. He really helped me challenge one of my assumptions, which was that I needed to have a PhD in order to carry on working for him? And he said, no, you don't. So that was extremely helpful. Testing assumptions is an extremely helpful thing. But you know, the most important part of that conversation was this thing he said at the end, which is not what I would have expected a highly quantitatively oriented economist to say. He said, okay, well, look, whatever the decision is, after you've made the decision, don't tell anyone. Don't tell anyone for a week, and just wake up each morning and notice how you feel with that decision that you've made. And I thought, I mean, this was tremendous advice on a number of different levels. I thought, wow, this is quite deep advice, because what you're saying here is that there could be extra information that I haven't really included in this decision that might surface as a result of letting this percolate a little bit. And I thought, well, that's very wise when you think about, you know, the fact that this is a complex decision. There could be things I'm missing. And it's also just, I think, really speaking directly to that feeling of there's no right answer. Be kind to yourself. Approach this with self-compassion. So let's have a look at some of the questions over here. Oh, thank you. Your work has had a fabulous impact on me and my clients. That's very lovely to hear, Carolyn. That's wonderful. I'm really I'm thrilled. There's a question from Carolyn about how could you have figured in your feelings about waste into that decision. Do you know, I'm really glad you mentioned that. There's a limit to how much I can tell you in a 25-minute video about all of the things that I was thinking about this. But actually, this was quite important to me. And when I think about the values that were quite top of mind, it was absolutely clear that if we couldn't sell stuff, and there's a limit to what we could give away, we did give away a fair amount. But we just did not want to put stuff in landfill. It was very, very clear that avoiding waste was very, very important to us. So thank you, Carolyn, for bringing that out. Yes, I mean, I mentioned one value, but I would say actually this was really helpful to us to kind of guiding our choices. So thank you for asking about that. What else have we got here? Adrienne. Hi, Adrienne. Such a helpful process. Yeah. So lots of emotional discussions, decided not to take. Yeah, I mean, so the thing is with regrets, you know, I guess what I'm saying is see if you can not have them, actually. Because if you do go through the conversation, if you do go through the decision in as structured a way as you can, recognizing actually that feelings are facts as well. How you feel about something is a fact to be borne in mind, because it, you know, managing our mental state is as important as any other factor in all of this. If you can get to a place where you think, okay, I've thought about all the angles, I really am not sure what the right thing to do is, and I'm going to have to make a choice, then it's easier to feel after the fact that there aren't perhaps so many regrets, even though, you know, it's natural to go there. So thank you for holding for holding that up to the light. So there we are. I'm going to leave it there for today. I hope that was helpful. Certainly very real in my life, and I'm sure that you're dealing with many things like this in your life. I would love to hear your examples. I'd love to hear the dilemmas you're wrestling with. I'd love to hear what challenges you're thinking about as you're trying to make choices for yourself, for your colleagues, and for your family in the year ahead. I hope that's been useful to you today. Thank you very much, and I wish you a week relatively free of dilemmas. Bye, everybody.